Madeline was perplexed by the fact that she had gone through 5 different babysitters in just 6 months, none of whom lasted more than a couple of weeks at a time. What was taking place? There must be something wrong with these nannies. She knew that she would need to employ some deception and cunning if she was going to solve the mystery. After all, she would do everything for her kids. Madeline pulled up a video she had taken of her new nanny on her laptop. When she first tried to record it, it failed. The answers, though, were finally coming to her. She had been puzzling over the pattern of 1-month nanny turnover for a long time. But now, at long last, she would get the response she had been seeking. What happened when Benjamin's babysitter had to leave the house was a big issue. After considering her alternatives, she decided it was time to do research. She opened it and found it in the same spot as before. Madeline suddenly understood why people had given up on Benjamin after all those months. She was so nervous she could hardly meet Benjamin's gaze. There was no explanation for Benjamin's actions in her mind. It's inexplicable how he could do this behind her back. In her mind, her son was no longer the person he had been. I don't understand what's wrong with her son. How come she didn't realize this sooner? Why didn't the nannies mention Benjamin to her? Madeline surprised everyone by having a son, Benjamin, at the ripe old age of 25. But Madeline knew deep down that she wanted to start a family. To put it another way, she was prepared to become a mom. However, she soon learned that it wasn't simple to bring up a child on her alone. Given that Madeline's parents only lived half an hour away, they were able to lend a hand occasionally during her first few years of independence. But her dad wanted to retire, so she was alone in the big city by the time Benjamin was 3. She supported herself and her son with a part-time real estate job at a reputable firm in the city. Even so, she was still gone from her son for quite some time. She had to make a decision she had been putting off because of a lack of alternatives for childcare. The search for a babysitter for Benjamin had to begin. She didn't want to do this. She didn't believe in relying on anybody else to raise her child and did everything in her power to be by Benjamin's side whenever possible. She felt it was vital that Benjamin be raised with the same values she had. She needed her job too, so she'd have to settle for less here. She sought Benjamin's advice because he was just 6 years old. He was reserved with new people and disliked being separated from his mother for extended periods. As a baby, he was an attached and later a needy child. He was disturbed that she would leave him less often. He was confused about why she worked instead of staying home with him. She spent a substantial amount of time looking for someone who would be suitable for Benjamin before she was successful in her search. The mother has done babysitting for many years and is good at it. From the depths of her being, Madeline had faith in her. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last, as calamity hit suddenly. When Madeline returned to the office after an absence, she found Denise in a state of despair since she had quit without giving any notice. Madeline was curious about what had occurred, but Benjamin shrugged and recommended she play with him. What may have prompted her to react the way she did? After some thought, Madeline decided to give being a babysitter another try. She hoped that if Benjamin were with a woman who reminded him of her, he would feel better. But alas, it was a failure. This babysitter gave notice of her resignation with a short, nasty text message the following morning. Then Madeline asked Benjamin another inquiry about his day. He shrugged again, vowing on his stuffed animal that he had done nothing wrong. To engage Benjamin's more masculine side, she decided to employ Aiden as Benjamin's third babysitter. They connected right away, and it was clear that Benjamin had a great deal of admiration for him. For the third time in as many weeks, Benjamin had to find a new babysitter on Friday, the second day of the 5th week. Aiden told them he couldn't continue watching him since he had been offered a full-time position. Making sure Madeline had a month to locate a new sitter, he offered to stay. Benjamin was devastated by this news. She did not comprehend why the previous nannies had neglected to provide her with any concrete details regarding the events that had led up to their departure. To continue being in the dark about it was something she refused to do. Madeline set up covered cameras around the house before Brooklyn started kindergarten so she could see her day unfold in real time. Madeline would slip to her computer each night after Benjamin and Brooklyn went to bed to conduct video analysis of the previous day's events. Despite this, she was a little scared at the beginning. It seemed as though everything was proceeding normally, and she was sorry that she had sniffed at Brooklyn, the dependable babysitter. Rapidly, the wind began to shift in our favor. Madeline concluded that there was nothing of interest in the surveillance film. Therefore, she decided to quit keeping an eye on the two. However, after a month, Madeline noticed a big change in the relationship between Benjamin and Brooklyn, and it started to feel familiar. Madeline arrived home from work one day to find the house in an odd mood because Brooklyn had left in a hurry. The babysitter was often upbeat and engaging in conversation. She hardly spoke to Madeline that day and practically ran out of the house without saying goodbye. She found this suspicious. She should probably check out the cameras. Madeline initially attempted to dissuade herself. Maybe the girl was coping with some troubles on the inside, and it was nothing major. Before seeing the tape from the previous day's surveillance, Madeline waited patiently for her kid to nod off before doing so. Madeline watched the film when peace and quiet had been restored to the home. As far as anyone could tell, Brooklyn and Benjamin were both in good shape first thing in the morning, and that trend continued throughout the day. Towards the end of the day, she discovered something quite concerning. Since Madeline's new gadgets didn't record sound, she had to infer what Benjamin and Brooklyn were talking about. They appeared to be in the midst of a fairly intense discussion. Brooklyn's arms were flailing madly, and she could see the scream build up on Benjamin's face. She was left bewildered in the living room as he went out to his room and slammed the door. However, an unexpected twist occurred. Not seeing much of a response from Benjamin, Brooklyn abruptly turned and walked out of the room, and to Madeline's shock, the house. Exactly where was she now anyway? Madeline kept watching the tape and was surprised to find that it had been an hour before Brooklyn had returned. The house was now under Benjamin's complete control. When no one was present to prevent it, Benjamin leisurely accessed everything he normally couldn't. He emptied the candy drawer and stuffed himself with chocolate and other treats. He discovered a box of matches somewhere else in the drawer, which he frantically tried to light. Is this what he did with the other babies? Madeline asked in horror. The tense situation between Brooklyn and the kid continued when she returned. Until Madeline got home from work, she ignored him for the rest of the day. What she had seen had shocked her deeply. For everyone else, save her son was a living nightmare. Were they his true colors when she wasn't around? Madeline could not directly question either of them about what had occurred earlier that day. She had no choice but to engage in some dishonesty. If Benjamin were to make a mistake, he would never admit responsibility on his own. Therefore, Madeline needed to devise a strategy to catch him in the act. The realization hit her all at once. Madeline could change the cameras to a live feed on her phone, allowing her to monitor Benjamin closely and predict his antics. She had to neglect her responsibilities at the office temporarily, but this mattered far more. Eventually, she would have to put an end to this. Madeline was taken aback by the overwhelming support she received from her supervisor after she announced her desire for personal time off. Since Madeline was such a reliable worker, her boss had no qualms about granting her some time off to deal with personal matters. She appreciated that he asked a few questions. As soon as 3 days had passed, Benjamin was acting normally again. The same pattern she had seen the day before reappeared to her. After an altercation, Brooklyn left Benjamin alone at home because she could not convince him to comply with her. Madeline's opportunity to find out the truth has finally arrived. Madeline hurried home to find out what her kid was up to. With any luck, she'd make it there before Brooklyn returned, sparing herself the awkwardness of having to justify her knowledge that Benjamin was alone. Her son was in the kitchen, and she quietly entered through the back door. Again, he was doing whatever he wanted in the kitchen and making a mess when he was done. Madeline yelled at Benjamin in a furious tone, "Hi there, Benjamin." The boy spun about, his mouth stuffed with candies as he did so. His cheeks became a brilliant shade of scarlet, and he mumbled something as an alibi, but he was aware that it was a fabrication and that he had been discovered. What the hell is going on right this very second? Because of this, Benjamin was trapped. When his mother asked him why his prior babysitters had left so suddenly, he had to explain. She escorted him to the family room, sat him down and waited for him to explain what was happening. Madeline was deeply affected by his confession of all that had happened to him over the preceding few months. Evidently, Benjamin had grown quite possessive of his babysitters, so the news that they had all moved away from him was a source of great anguish for him. He probed each sitter with harmless inquiries about their day and tried to learn as much about them as he could from their histories. Benjamin would spend a few weeks trying to be the perfect angel for each sitter, hoping that his cool head and reason would convince them to stay with him indefinitely. But he would strike back if they started dating, changed jobs, or showed even the slightest interest in his other buddies. It wasn't a nice sight, that's for sure. Benjamin would likely recruit babysitters on social media, where they would undoubtedly engage in the usual teen activities of drinking and partying. Surprisingly, he would then use this knowledge against him by stating things like, "I'll tell your parents about our behavior outside of work, and I'll lie and say we do the same stuff at work." Almost Madeline couldn't accept that this was her son. He had fooled her into thinking he was a nice boy for a long time, but he was sneakier than she could have ever imagined. She was upset and dissatisfied with Benjamin's behavior. This was not how she had taught him to act, and she wondered where he had gotten it. The nannies had all fled in a hurry, one after the other, since they refused to participate in Benjamin's plan. But Brooklyn was just too sugary for my liking. Madeline could tell from their brief discussions that this woman, probably in her 20s, was raised in a very religious household with very strict parents. The situation in Brooklyn was sticky. She was afraid she would be abandoned if her parents or siblings knew how she spent her time, especially on social media. Instead of jeopardizing her social standing by fighting Benjamin, she would eventually give up and watch from the outside as he joyfully wrecked the house. Madeline never pictured her son as such a person. Even though she had raised him as a single parent with an emphasis on respecting others' space and boundaries, she recognized that her son's actions reflected a failure on her part and resolved to do whatever it took to help him. A look of amazement flashed across Brooklyn's face when she walked in just then. The presence of Madeline here begs the question, why? Brooklyn, like Benjamin, stumbled over her words as she attempted to explain. Because she was so concerned about her parents finding out about her life, she had essentially left the child to his own devices, and she felt tremendous guilt over this. Madeline wanted to be angry at Brooklyn, but she understood where she came from, having experienced a similar upbringing. Brooklyn urged Madeline to give her, and Benjamin, another shot despite her guilt. Regardless of his antics, she appreciated her job very much and hoped for a chance to learn more about the youngster. Madeline hesitated for a little, but eventually gave her consent. Those who find themselves in a less than ideal situation like this one deserve a second shot. Madeline, relieved that Benjamin was in Brooklyn's care, stopped looking at the cameras and returned to work. The subsequent weeks were very different from the ones before. After being apprehended, Benjamin changed into the model of good behavior. He had cleaned up, been nice, and developed into a good buddy to Brooklyn. Madeline was beginning to see some positive results. This is a work of fiction written for the sole purpose of amusement. The story, its characters, and its events are all works of fiction. The pictures are for demonstration purposes only.